Egyptians are preparing to elect a new president, and for the first time ever, they have a real choice. But what kind of leader do the people want, and what kind of power will the winner have? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to this special edition of Inside Story in Cairo. I'm Mike Hanna. After months of instability and sporadic outbreaks of violence, Egyptians are taking another step towards establishing a new democracy. Having put a parliament in place, some 50 million eligible voters now have the opportunity to choose who's going to be president. It's a vote that could signal an end to decades of what has effectively been military rule. But it's still not certain exactly how much executive power the generals who've been running the country since the fall of Hosni Mubarak will be willing to cede. That's one of many questions to be discussed. But first, let's take a look back at this extraordinary campaign. Decades of authoritarian rule imploded in a campaign that no Egyptian has experienced before. 13 candidates vying for a position that in the past was essentially the preserve of one. A voters' buffet of competing political and religious ideologies. The only common strand, a policy of public flattery.
The people of Egypt are the people of the January 25th revolution, the heroes.
The responsibility that is coming is your responsibility. These elections are in your hands.
We are entering an extremely important phase, and I will return Egypt's rights to you.
In the absence of clearly defined policies, a welter of campaign tricks. Mysterious billboards suddenly filled the candidate's face. The formation of human chains, a transparent attempt to demonstrate mass support. Few campaign promises can be trusted. In Egypt, the voters may well question whether any can. But in just one live televised debate, the startling realization that politicians can be questioned, and if the candidate wants to be president, he must give an answer. The outcome is truly unpredictable. In this infant democracy, the polling is widely inaccurate and generally involves more propaganda than science. Some seek to find a barometer in the results of the parliamentary election, where the parties that define themselves as Islamist emerged dominant. But this is the election of an individual, where personality may play a greater determining role than ideology. And piercing the bubble of confident campaign rhetoric, a reality publicly acknowledged, that many Egyptians may make their final decision only when in the polling booth, with pen in hand. So, what kind of president will Egyptians choose? To discuss that and other things, I'm joined by our guests. Dina Zakaria, a founder of the Freedom and Justice Party. Mohammed Waked, a member of the National Front for Justice and Democracy. And Abdullah al Arian, the Assistant Professor of Middle East History at Wayne University in Michigan. Welcome to you all.
Hi. Thank you.
To begin with you, Dina, that question. What kind of leader do you think Egyptians are looking for?
First of all, thank you for having me here in this panel. And I think that the kind of leader that the Egyptian needs to see, that they want to see a leader who can have a real platform, who can really bear the responsibility, because there are a lot of challenges that we faced throughout a year and a half till now, and we know that still we will have another challenges. So they need a strong one, but at the same time have political experience, have a real platform that can be applied on earth, and to have a group of faithful experts around him who can apply such kind of platform. So they are willing to have a new leader, but not by the means of Mubarak regime, but by the means of a real institution system. It's not just a leader, but he should have a group of workers who can work with him.
Mohammed Waked, we heard there among that the word strong. Do you think that this is something that many of the voters are looking for, a strong leader?
Well, it's not really clear what they're looking for, because it differs from one segment to the other. It's not clear if they even care about a program or not. they have aspirations about the future, and they tend to project these aspirations onto the figure that they are talking about or trying to vote for. And for example, the word strong, even the word strong, when they come to interpret strong, they interpret it very differently. Strong for some people means that he has a big organization that's going to back him up. And in that case, that would be something like the nominee of the candidate of the Muslim Brotherhood. Others say strong in the sense that he talks forcefully on TV. So they go to Musa or Shafi, and so on and so forth. So first of all, we don't really know exactly what they're looking for, and we don't know if they interpret the characteristics that we project onto the candidates in the same way we think they should.
Abdullah al Arian, what do you think the driving force of the voter will be? What motives do you think will be lying behind the choice?
Well, I think what we're seeing really, the one unifying factor is the fact that all Egyptians want someone who's going to deliver them from the past year and a half of instability and volatility in the political situation. They want someone who's going to end the period of transition. The real question that then divides all Egyptians is what that resolution will look like. And of course, you have very vastly differing opinions on that. And some people would actually prefer to go back to the period before the revolution of January 25th of 2011. And install a kind of a strongman leader who's going to supposedly bring that experience of the Mubarak regime and bring about a kind of return to that old order because of the law and order that it provided to many Egyptians. But of course, I think that's the minority, and the majority of Egyptians would rather see something of a real political outcome that's going to be reflected in the aims and the aspirations of the Egyptians who did turn out and call for the removal of the old regime.
To go back to you, Mohammed Waked, is this part of the revolutionary process? Is it perceived as that by the public, this election?
Well, it depends about what you mean about the public. Part of the revolutionary movement sees this as part of counter-revolution coming to crystallize in the final stage of taking over the revolutionary project. So you are forced to vote for a president without knowing how much executive power he would have, whether or not he would have any executive power after the constitution is actually formed. So we don't know if he has any ability to actually implement the programs and the promises that and so on and so forth. So it's a very strange arrangement that we are talking about here. So for a lot on the revolutionary side, this is actually a counter-revolutionary stage. But they differ as how to tackle it, or what's the best way to deal with it. But I think there is consensus that that this is the final forceful move of the counter-revolution.
I'd like to return to the point that you made about the powers of the president. That's a very critical one, but we'll get back to that a little bit later in the discussion. But Dina Zakaria, I'd like you to pick up on that point of whether this is part of the revolution, or is it perhaps, as some would contend, perhaps part of a counter-revolution. Yeah. How do you perceive it?
Talk about the situation right now.
The election itself.
Yeah, the election itself. Of course, what we were afraid of, most of the protesters, that the transitional period, when it comes to be prolonged, it means that the counter-revolution can work more successfully. They can reunite it again to regain back their power, and that's taken for granted. So what's happened really on ground, that because the transitional period was too long till now, from our point of view, actually, that's what really happened, that they were reunited again. They used different tools that they can use to give false image about the revolution itself and about the protesters and about the different political streams in Egypt. Giving this false image about everything makes people feel confused. So that right now, the popular people will think about, okay, we just need someone to bring back stability again. We want to return back again to Mubarak regime. Some of them think like that, but I think that the majority still think that the revolution was a real solution for their problems, but they need to regain back this trust again. And I think that tomorrow it's going to be a chance for them to choose someone who can give them this trust.
Abdullah al Arian, that whole issue of looking for security, of looking for something after the traumatic months that have passed, there are among the candidates, say, former prime minister, there's a former foreign minister, Some would argue, describe them as falloon remnants of the old regime. And yet their participation in this campaign has, to a degree, many would argue, been a confirmation of the democracy of the process. Do you see it in that light?
I don't necessarily see it in that light. I think that you know, unfortunately, the democratic process that was set up is being exploited by certain elements from the old regime to try to simply find a new path back to the old position that they once enjoyed and maintained. I think we've seen it in the way that they've campaigned, because they've been quite uncomfortable with the idea of actually delivering on the promises that were made by the people who overthrew the Mubarak regime. We have a candidate in Ahmed Shafiq who, for instance, has threatened the voters.
The former prime minister.
Right, the former prime minister, who was the last prime minister, in fact, that was appointed by Mubarak, has actually threatened the voters with a period of military crackdown should any kind of protests break out in the immediate moments following his victory, should he win the presidency. And so I don't think that's a typical kind of presidential campaign in which one tries to project a sense of unity within the country and also of trying to kind of play within the spirit of the democratic process that is currently being played out throughout the country.
Mohammed Waked, I mean, the very presence of candidates such as these has led to elements of Egyptian society from boycotting this process. Do you feel that the participation of people involved in some way with the previous authorities does undercut this democratic process?
I think what undercuts, there are two different ways by which the regime is trying to undercut the democratic process. One of them is actually that the Fulul is grouping again. And that's only one of them. The other is that you can actually vote a revolutionary president in office, and then he's unable to deliver, and you discredit the whole project. So it's not just that the Fulul, I mean, what makes the counter-revolution able to win in such a situation is far more complex than Shafiq winning. It's also that, for example, Abu Futuh or Morsi would win, and then we still don't know if the parliament is going to exist in the next months or not, because the Constitutional Court has not yet decided whether or not the way we voted was constitutional. We don't know if half of it will be dissolved, all of it will be dissolved, it will not be dissolved. And as I said, we don't know the powers that the president have, but we know he has no powers over the military establishment already. So it's already set in such a way that undercuts all democratic potential of the process, even if Fulul do not win. Now, we should have, and that's what people in the revolutionary movement have been trying to struggle for, we should have already set, first of all, the mandate of the president, how we're going to choose him, what's the role of the army. All of these things should have been decided, not left vague to be decided after the president wins. And unfortunately, we have not been able to do so. And now we're building, the case for counter-revolution is basically like a pyramid with a very rotten foundation that we keep building and increasing the height of. And now we're almost at the tip of the pyramid, when in fact we should have, and we still need to look at the very foundation of it.
Well, just to recap for our viewers, the whole essence of a new constitution has been a matter of huge argument, debate and controversy. Some had hoped that the constitution would have been done by the time of this presidential election, but as yet there's still no agreement on the body that will be tasked with drawing up that new constitution. So it's not clear exactly what the degree of powers being exercised by the man who's going to be voted in over the next 48 hours will wield. Dina Zakaria, we've heard there these massive problems surrounding this election that are not about the process itself, but about the context that it is taking place in. Is this a major stumbling block to the creation of a democracy, the fact that executive powers have not yet been defined?
Of course, it's a great problem that we are facing right now, but I think that we are all facing this problem because we were all obliged to face it. Whether you're going to choose the first choice or the second choice, it's as if it was planned to be like that. So now it's a problem that we have to face, and we have to work for facing it. Somewhat, for example, some of the political activists or political representatives try now to represent a kind of transitional constitution also, but of course it was refused also. Some of them say that why don't the SCAF again suggest another kind of constitution as a transitional, but of course we cannot accept that because the kind of power was already now in the hand power of the parliament. It's not for the SCAF to decide. So now what we have to do is that we should overcome this problem, and we should reunite again to work to overcome this problem and to have the election done without rigging, and then to decide what will go on.
Abdullah al Arian, you've got a situation here where a man's going to be voted in, not really aware whether, for example, he's going to be the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. He doesn't know that. He doesn't know whether he's going to have the power to dissolve Parliament. He doesn't know that. He knows he's got the power to appoint it, perhaps, but all of these issues are very, very unclear. And to what extent, I repeat that question, does it undermine the veracity and integrity of the process?
Well, I think it certainly is a point of no return. So there's no going back from the fact that, unfortunately, this is the situation that we found ourselves in. This was a result of the referendum that was passed all the way back in March of 2011, in which the Egyptian voters overwhelmingly said they would rather go through the electoral process before they deal with the challenges of rewriting the constitution. That has led us down this path in which we've had numerous confrontations with the SCAF, who've taken every opportunity to try and exploit whatever...
The SCAF, if I can just interject, is the Supreme Council of Armed Forces. That is the body that supervises the country since the downfall of Mubarak.
Right. So the Egyptian military, seeing this as being kind of the height of their power and authority, have tried to exploit the situation to try to frequently issue certain proclamations of what powers they hope to retain in the future system. Of course, this has been rejected by all the political forces within Egypt. And now I think the challenge really is to come up with a consensus presidential candidate and winner who is going to deliver on the aspirations that all of the various political factions have requested over the previous year and a half. And that consensus figure, I think, is going to be facing a very uphill battle and a very important confrontation with the SCAF.
I'll return to that issue of consensus, but Mohammed Waked, rising up here is a question. Is this actually about whether or not the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, the army, is being honest about wanting to return powers to the civilians more than the actual constitutional process, the electoral process that we're looking at? Are we looking at, most importantly, what are the intentions of the military rather than the voting procedures itself?
Yes, of course. I mean, it's very clear. It's been clear for a year and a half now that this is not the doing of somebody who's really trying to smoothly transfer power to a civilian government. I mean, I don't think anybody has any doubt about that anymore. It's someone who wants to tailor the whole process in a certain way that they still remain in power where it matters to them, to keep the privileges of the establishment and to keep control of specific files, let's say, including national security, international relations, and some of the privileges of the business as well that they've protected very strongly. For example, they intervened with Assam Sharaf's first cabinet in order to cancel a certain tax that would have levied some petty tax from the rich. So basically they have a certain understanding of where society should go. I don't think they want to run the executive power. They want somebody to run it under their supervision. And that's been the whole problem. We see a great deal of dishonesty in the media in how it covers the protests that have been going on for a year and a half now, including charges of drugs, prostitution, having, being armed, stuff like that. And we've been there and we know that this is the exact same line of representation that the Mubarak regime have been always representing us with. So the moment you see that repeating every 2 months, you know that there's somebody not very honest about his intention running the whole show. Otherwise, they would have by mistake at least represented the movement honestly even once. So yes, I agree totally that there's a great deal of manipulation going on. It's not as it's been declared, of course.
Now, for the record, the SCAF as a point of has publicly stated it will continue to meet its pledge to hand over power as soon as the president is elected by the end of June. Even earlier, they've implied if there's a first-round victory.
What I'm saying is they would be able to hand over some powers.
That key issue there, Dina Zakaria, that word some powers.
Yeah.
We also heard there that the implication almost that there's been a pattern coming from the military leaders to impede smooth democratic process. Do you think there's validity to that kind of position?
I think that the SCAF from the very beginning shown for everyone that they are willing to give power to the civilian power. Actually, I'm talking from the very beginning because it's gonna show what's going on right now. It was just kind of showy attitude. It was not the right attitude, and it was not the right intention for them. It was just a way how we can do it, but by our own way. It's not the way of that the protester would like to have. Whether they are related to any stream, it's not like that, but it's just how we can do it and by our own way. Every time they were trying to play this game, how to gain a lot of things and gives just slide of givings to the protesters.
So it was a show,
to their demands. It was just a show.
saying.
From my point of view, it was just a show, because every time they can start this game and they cannot succeed, so they give you such a bright attitude that, okay, we are willing to give you the power, we don't want to stay for a long time, no, we want to go back to our normal place. But then you can find another kind of problems emerging on surface, and they, as if they wanted to say to all Egyptians, you see, that's what the revolution have brought to you. And using different kind of satellite channels, who most of them were owned to Mubarak, who are affiliated to, they are affiliated to Mubarak regime actually. They are businessmen related to Mubarak. So using this media to give this false image about everything related to the revolution, talking about Ikhwan sometime, or talking about protesters themselves, showing that they are different all the time. They are always different from each other. They cannot reunite in one just one point of view. Everyone think about his own benefits and so on and so forth. So at the end, now we are in this position that tomorrow we are going to have a presidential election, but still people are fear about rigging, and they want to make sure that they will have a real democratic step in this presidential election.
Well, as you said, that regardless of all of the issues involving SCAF, this election is going ahead. And Mohammed Waked, I want to return to that question of consensus. Is there a consensus candidate among those standing? If so, who?
No, of course not. And there will not be. It's impossible to think that there will be a consensus around any project per se, because these are competing projects ultimately. And because the whole idea has been packaged as elections to rule executive power and so on, not as a revolution that wants to overcome an old regime and then we can compete. So the very packaging itself means that you can never achieve consensus, not even in the so-called revolutionary nominees, candidates. You find that the two most prominent are Abu al-Futuh and Hamdin Sabbahi, and they are entering a cutthroat competition in which they will probably drive each other out of the second round. At least the numbers that we get in a lot of the
I
polls
just want to
like
bring
that.
in Abdullah at this particular point, as we're running out of time, that issue of consensus. Do you agree with Mohammed that there is no consensus
Well, I certainly
possible?
don't think that there can be no consensus with the nominees who are actually there to represent, for instance, the remnants of the old regime. And there can't be, as long as the Muslim Brotherhood is kind of fielding its own candidate, and of course they make up a very strong contingent. But beyond that, I think there has been, at least with the Abu Futuh campaign, a very strong push to try and bring about a consensus among all of the other remaining political forces within Egypt. And we've seen it as quite a successful effort, bringing in people as far as the Salafis, all the way to many liberals and some Coptic Christians. And I think that, for this to be a successful campaign, of course, there has to be a greater push from some of the other factions to try and join within this campaign. But so far they've been quite successful. And should they make it into the second round, I think that so far the projections seem to be that the Abu al-Futuh campaign could succeed, that could emerge as being kind of the candidate to represent the revolution going into the second round in the runoff.
Well, that brings us to the end of this particular discussion. My thanks to our guests here in Cairo, Dina Zakaria, Mohammed Waked, and Abdullah al Arian. And thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you've got any comments or information that you'd like to give, please email us on insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.